Good morning, church. It's great to be with you today, and I want to say a very special thank you to this music team. Those songs have been just what we needed. And to Brianna, weren't those pictures in that story wonderful? And I also want to thank Emily and Melissa for a wonderful prayer on behalf of all of us. So thank you to all of you. Today, I want to talk about because. Now, some of you would probably have heard of Andrea Bocelli. He's been called the world's best known and best loved tenor. He was blind from 12 years of age, and recently he released this film, or it was released, I believe, on Valentine's Day, but it only showed for 4 days, I was told. Love in Portofino. One of the songs that Andre has shared with the world is one called Because. Because you come to me with naught but love, and hold my hand and lift my eyes above, a wider world of hope and joy I see, because you come to me. Because, do you remember those early days? Young mothers frustrated, and the child says, "Why, Mummy? Because I said so." Ever heard that? Or have you heard the children arguing and saying something, and the other one says, "How do you know?" Because. It ends all discussion. Because. Have you been in that situation? Or heard that? And you might even think of the great apostle, the beloved John, who wrote, "We love him because he first loved us." Now, in our title today, we had because or therefore, and I want to join those together, and they come to us today from Corinth. Some of you have been and seen the Corinthian Canal that was built 100 years ago or more, the great bridge that you travel over. But on one end, there is another bridge that goes down into the water 8 meters while the ships come and sail through. Then it comes up again and the cars go over. It's a great place. On one end of this canal, these are the ruins of ancient Centuria. If you start with Romans chapter 16, Paul talks about Phoebe, who was a servant of the church here at Centuria. And if you were going east, across back to Antioch and Jerusalem, you would sail from here. This is old Centuria, or the ruins of it, under the water today. And in Corinth itself, you can see the old ruins of ancient Corinth, where Paul was, and where he met the temple of Zeus. And of course, here you walk on the old road that Paul would have walked on that went down to the other port of Lechion. This was the bema, and the stone in the middle is about where Paul would have stood as he faced Gallio. And he was taken to court here. Now in Corinth, and up the top is Acrocorinth, where there was a great temple. But Corinth, what's happened now? Let's go, here we are. Therefore, take your Bible and open it to 2 Corinthians, because this was the letter that he wrote, 2 Corinthians, and I'm reading in chapter 4. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 1. And it says, therefore. It starts off with that word, therefore. And as I looked up the dictionary, it said as a result of, or because of what has been said. It could also be said it follows logically. As a consequence, a natural result as night follows day. Let me read on. And if you think Paul is saying this immediately after chapter 3, where he's talked about the new covenants, where he's talked in verse the last verse of the chapter 3, I think it's 18, and he says, "And we, who with unveiled faces all reflect the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his likeness with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit," because of what Jesus has done for you, because of his great love for you, because of his covenant promises to you. Now he says, therefore, this is the result, because the light of the gospel is so clear, we can act in a certain way. Can you imagine the greatest love story of the universe? If Jesus has declared this, and as you enter heaven, can you imagine how you would be talking to him? What would you be saying? Because he will be seeing all these redeemed, and Isaiah 53 says he'll see the results of his labour and will be satisfied. When Jesus sees you in heaven, he will be satisfied. Because, therefore, it follows logically. It's a natural consequence. Well, let's read on in this verse. Somehow I pressed the wrong button here. Here we go. It says, because of the light of the gospel is so clear, because it reveals glorious truths, we can behold the glory of the Lord, to reflect the Lord's glory, and we're being transformed into his likeness. Okay. Therefore, since through God's mercy. And I thought, well, mercy. It is compassion. It is pity. It's benevolence. It's an extreme understanding to an offender. And mercy always comes from someone in a higher position of rank or authority, or who has been harmed in some way. It sets aside all questions of equity, justice, vengeance, or blame. You know, the French have such a great understanding of this word, they even say thank you is merci. Since, because through God's mercy. Therefore, don't forget, it's the because. Because it comes through God's mercy. Well, you can think about what he says to us. I think of mercy. Michael Servetus was one who was put to death in Geneva by John Calvin. He didn't see eye to eye, or he had some different views, and Calvin sort of let him, or encouraged them, to put this man to death. And he said, "May God in his mercy enable us, without obstinacy, to perceive our errors." He's trying to get a message back to John Calvin. He's also asking for mercy for himself. And you know the verse in Micah chapter 6 where it says, "He has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." So mercy has got quite something to do with it. Most of you, if you studied a little bit of the Bard from Shakespeare, from Stratford-on-Avon, know the quality of mercy is not strained. And this is really talking about God's mercy to us. It drops as the gentle dew from heaven. And this comes from the Merchant of Venice. Okay, since through God's mercy, and I want to go on from there. Let me tell you a story of mercy. Some of you, there we are, may not have heard of Patrick Ferguson. Patrick Ferguson was known as the best rifle shot in the British Army in North America. He even invented his own rifle. He created his own sniping unit. And he almost took out a person that you know as George Washington. The story went like this. It was on the 11th of September in 1777. He was involved in what is called the Battle of Brandywine. It was the fight between the British and the American in their War of Independence. And he sees, as he looks along, here come two officers, and one of them happened to be George Washington. Now, this guy Ferguson, he had a couple of rules. Firstly, he said, you don't shoot someone without letting them know that you're there. Now, somehow that doesn't happen today. So he stands up, and Washington and the other man start to gallop away, and he had the chance to shoot General George Washington. But he had another aspect. He didn't believe in shooting someone in the back. Somehow rules of war have changed, haven't they? And he goes along and meets with others, and he's told, he says, did you know that the guy you could have shot was the general? Well, this guy, the Americans say, could have helped the American War of Independence. But it was in his mercy. He didn't act that way. There's another person you've already heard mentioned today, and that's Mother Teresa. It was 1979. She was in Oslo, Norway, accepting the Nobel Peace Prize. And she told a story to demonstrate mercy. She said two friends are walking through the desert, and during some point of the journey, they had an argument, and one slapped the other. Well, the one that gets hurt, he stoops down and writes in the sand, "My friend slapped me today." They kept walking. They found an oasis, and they decided to take a bath in this water. They had a drink and then a bath, but he got stuck in the mud, and his friend helped pull him out. So he gets something and scratches on a rock. "My friend saved me." And the person said, "Why did you write the first time in the sand and this time you scratch it in stone?" He said, "When someone hurts us, we should write it in the sand where the winds of forgiveness can blow over it. But if someone does something good to you, it should be engraved in stone where no wind will ever erase it." Mother Teresa said, "That's mercy." And Paul writes, "Therefore, because, since, through God's mercy." Jesus told stories of mercy. A couple of them you would well recognize. The Good Samaritan. The man who owed 10,000 talents. And Jesus, the Master, forgave him. Stories of mercy. In Luke chapter 1, verse 50, it says, "His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation." And if you want another one from Paul, he says in Ephesians, "But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, makes us alive with Jesus Christ." So God has mercy for us. We should be saying mercy every day to God because of that. In fact, the writer of the Hebrews says, "Let us therefore approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we might obtain mercy and find grace to help in our time of need." Okay. One writer by the name of Mark Hopton said that our prayer and God's mercy are like two buckets in a well. As one goes down, the other comes up. If you pray, the bucket of mercy comes. They're joined together. The throne of God will deliver mercy. God bends over backwards in his mercy. Paul's aim was to do everything, all his life, to seek some way to touch others with the love that had redeemed him. Therefore, since through God's mercy, back in Corinthians, it goes on. We're still in verse 1. Therefore, since through God's mercy, we have this ministry. Wow. Have you ever thought that mercy, which is this special consideration of kindness, God has given you a work to do. God's mercy is boundless. We can approach his throne of grace and find mercy, and he's willing to give it. But it's through the mercy of God that we, all of us, have this ministry. That's what God called us for. Have you ever thanked God that he's given you a work to do for him? Paul says it clearly. Therefore, because, since, through God's mercy, hey, we have this ministry. He hasn't just saved us to have a nice holiday. In his mercy, he puts us on his team. It's not about us. It's about Jesus Christ. In fact, Paul goes on and he says it's all about him. Is my life about him? Are my plans and life all about him? Are my thoughts and hopes and dreams all about him? Or does this ministry that he's called me to sort of take a little back seat? Because ministry can be so many things that God has for us. Many have found their ministry. Can you imagine what it would be like if the 17.5 million Adventists around the world actively have their ministry? Everyone, 17.5 million. I've thought of some that have found their ministry. Just recently I heard, you've all seen this book, haven't you? Haven't you? The Great Hope. It's a portion of great controversy. I think there's a few boxes of them out there. There is a guy that you know by the name of Jack Goldsmith. Have you ever heard of him? Ever heard him here? He's just given out 500 of these in the town of Cobar. 500. That's beside the, must be millions of signs by now. Jack's got a ministry. Every day he does something. I asked Phil Fraser this week. In our church we have Joan Frew and Phil and some other ladies that work on a stall every few weeks. Did you know that they've raised approaching $300,000 since they've been going? And thousands upon thousands of people have been blessed. That's a ministry. Helped so many others. We have this ministry. I spoke this week with our division youth man, Cross, and I said to him, what do you know? He said, there's one person that really comes to mind who has a great ministry. Colin Hone. He came to our elders meeting recently. He sponsors or he speaks about the 40 days of prayer and so on. In some countries it's 10 as well. He's gone all over Africa, around the world. He's a financial planner here in this district. But he's seen hundreds and thousands come to a renewed experience. Just a person. His ministry. Therefore, we have this ministry. I asked Nick Cross, what else have you got? He said, have you heard of Barnabas? I said, no, who's Barnabas? He said, he's a builder out in Honiara. He with a group of friends, he's got a little business that does building work, but they have a ministry, they call it Paid in Full. Paid in Full. And they go and help people that need some help. As well as his business, he helps this person and this one, and I say it's paid in full. And it helps the church grow there. He said he's got a great ministry, a builder. I think of the hundreds of volunteers in action who don't get a proper wage but have shared right across the Pacific. In fact, for many years, this ministry started by Cliff Morgan up in Brisbane and stretched across New Guinea, the Solomons, Vanuatu, and so on. They were baptising a third of this division's accessions each year for some years. We have this ministry. I thought about this church. Forget about the 17.5 million Adventists around the world. If the members of this church, what's our membership? 260, 270, Vern? If everyone here, if there were 270 with a ministry for God that's active. Just a little while ago, I heard about the Wyong Baptist Church. As you go and worship there, and as you leave it, across the door is written this: you are now entering the mission field. You've been to church, but as you go out, you are now entering the mission field. Isn't that good? And that's true. And we need to remember that it's not me, it's Jesus, and it's all about him. I go down in this chapter and I read in verse 7, 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. Jars of clay. I think of the bottle of clay that Mary Magdalene had that breaks and tips it on Jesus' feet. Someone wrote this about this verse. The world is waiting to get a whiff of the perfume of Jesus through you. We are jars of clay. In us, in you, in me, in each one of us. There is this precious gift of the story of redemption through Jesus Christ. No wonder Paul says, therefore, because since through God's mercy we have this ministry. I thought, how much God values this jar of clay. There was a church notice board just a couple of weeks ago, put this sign on their notice board. I was worth dying for. And that's what Jesus thought of you and me and each person. I was worth dying for. How much does God think of you as you join his team? I'm going back to Psalm just to read a couple of verses from Psalm 139. It tells you about God's thoughts to you. Psalm 139, and it's verses 17 and 18. Let me read this. How precious to me, David's writing, are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I'm awake, I'm still with you. God's thoughts to you, this jar of clay, are more than the sands on the seashore. Can you comprehend that? Okay, let me just ask you this. A week or two ago on the news it showed a car that was going into Switzerland. and the authorities stopped it, and underneath the floor in the back there was a false compartment there, and the authorities pulled out from that car a bar of gold and another one and another one. They said this little stash of gold that they were carrying from one country to the other was worth $11 million. Far more than the car. They were trying to take this treasure. And that's the sort of treasure that God puts in this jar of clay that's you and me. That's what it is. Some time ago, when Pastor Christian was here, I said, have you thought about this? This is not an easy place. Pastor Neil told us about how you get results in the Philippines, and I've seen that in many countries. But if, from this one church, if we had 20 or 30 people that says, I'll give 2 or 3 hours a week to go and help people in need, and just leave a card and say it's from your friends the Adventists at Erina. Let me tell you, those people would tell their children and their friends. This whole community would know within a few months that this is a centre that cares for people. It would transform our witness. What are you doing about the therefore, the because? Are you a messenger of mercy? I might have... Does because give you a ministry today and every day till he comes? Because, therefore, through God's mercy, I have this ministry carrying the treasure in an earthen vessel. And so the question for me this week and the question for you, what will be your ministry that God gives you? What will it be this week? Therefore, because since through God's mercy we have this ministry, what is yours for him this week? Our Father in heaven, we thank you so much that we have been redeemed. Through your great mercy, you've found a way to pay that price that we can be part of your team. Oh Father, because of this, therefore, and because of what you have done for us, help us each one to find the ministry you have for us and make that the center of our lives and our worship for you today and in the coming week. In Jesus' name, amen.